Between What's Going On and Let's Get It On, between the record that changed what soul music was allowed to say and the record that changed what it was allowed to feel, Marvin Gaye made a film score. Nobody talks about it much. It may have been the freest thing he ever recorded. The film was called Trouble Man. It was a 1,972 blaxploitation film directed by Ivan Dixon, released by 20th Century Fox, and forgotten by most of the people who saw it within years of seeing it. The soundtrack was not forgotten. It has persisted in the catalog, on the shelf between the two monuments, as the record that Marvin made when nobody was paying full attention. Marvin Gaye in 1972 was in a specific position. What's Going On had done something that he had not entirely anticipated. It had worked, not just commercially, though it had worked commercially beyond anything Gordy had predicted, but critically, culturally, in the way that serious work sometimes works when it arrives at exactly the moment that requires it. The album had established a new category of expectation for what Marvin Gaye was supposed to produce. He was now an artist with a capital A. Every subsequent record would be measured against it. The Trouble Man commission gave him something that the post-What's Going On landscape did not readily offer: a brief. A set of parameters he had not set himself, a story that was not his story, characters that were not his characters, a request to make music that served something external rather than expressing something internal. He could make what the film needed rather than what Marvin Gaye was supposed to make next. What he made was almost entirely instrumental. The score has vocals on the title track and very little elsewhere.
The rest of it is orchestral soul, jazz-inflected, built around the specific textures that the film's world required. A black man navigating a city that is trying to use and discard him. Cool under pressure, moving through the frame with the specific grace of someone who has learned how to survive. The title track is the entry point for most people who discover the album. It is everything the film's character is: contained, assured, not asking for anything, not explaining itself. Marvin sings it in a register that is lower than he typically used, almost conversational, as if the character he is voicing has decided that volume is for people who are less certain of themselves. The instrumental sections of the album are worth sitting with in a way that people who encounter it as background material do not usually sit with it. Marvin had spent his career working with arrangers and producers whose role was to shape the environment his voice operated in. On Trouble Man, he was the arranger, or close enough to it that the distinction was largely formal. The decisions about texture, about the instrumentation, about the way a theme developed and resolved, were his decisions. What those decisions reveal is a sensibility that the vocal records, for all their greatness, partly conceal. Marvin Gaye heard music architecturally. He heard the space inside the arrangement, the relationships between the instruments, the way a piece could breathe or close down. The Trouble Man score is the fullest demonstration of this that exists in his catalog. The film opened in November 1972. The soundtrack came out the same month. The film was not a critical success and was not expected to be. It fulfilled its function. It was entertaining. It was profitable in the markets it was made for, and then it passed. The soundtrack stayed. Not because anyone campaigned for it. There was no sustained critical reassessment, no rediscovery campaign. It simply remained available, and the people who found it found something that the cover and the context did not prepare them for. Let's Get It On came out in August 1973, 9 months after Trouble Man.
The distance between those two records is the distance between a man working in someone else's world and a man working entirely in his own. Both of them are genuine. Both of them are Marvin Gaye. They do not sound like the same person's work, which is exactly why the Trouble Man record matters. It is the evidence that he had more inside him than the records he made could contain.
That given the space and the brief and the freedom from the expectation of being Marvin Gaye, even briefly, even for a film nobody remembers, he could make something that sounded like a different kind of artist altogether. One who heard things he could not always put into a song. One who could build a room out of sound and let you live in it for 40 minutes. What's going on? Trouble Man. Let's get it on.
In sequence, 1 year, one of the most varied bodies of work any artist produced in a 12-month period. The middle one is the quiet one, the one between the monuments, the one that does not have anything to prove, and therefore proves everything.
To listen to Trouble Man is to hear a man liberated from the burden of the message. In What's Going On, Marvin was a vessel for the collective conscience of a fractured nation. In Let's Get It On, he was a vessel for the singular, agonizing, and ecstatic experience of individual desire. But in Trouble Man, he was simply a musician. He was free to experiment with tone, with dissonance, with the jagged edges of a cityscape rendered in brass and percussion. He wasn't trying to heal the country or seduce a lover. He was trying to capture the feeling of walking down a street at midnight, the tension of a potential confrontation, the cool relief of a shadow. The music is noir-steeped and deeply sophisticated, drawing on the jazz sensibilities he had admired for years, but had rarely been given the budget or the permission to fully explore in a studio environment. We often look at the discography of a legend and seek a linear narrative, a progression toward a peak. But Trouble Man represents a lateral move, a widening of the lens. It serves as a reminder that genius is not always directed toward a singular goal. Sometimes it is about the ability to inhabit different roles, to wear different masks, and to bring a high level of craft to a temporary assignment. The orchestration is deliberate, sparse when it needs to be, and overwhelming when the scene demands it. Marvin creates tension through rhythm, a steady driving pulse that mirrors the survival instincts of the protagonist on screen. There is a melancholy here that is different from the grief in What's Going On. It is a lonely, urban sadness. It is the sound of a man who knows he is on his own in the city. The fact that this project was so quickly dismissed by the critical machinery of the time is almost ironic, because it contains some of the most intricate and thoughtful composition Marvin ever recorded. It is a testament to the way our cultural gatekeepers often prioritize the important over the accomplished. Trouble Man wasn't trying to change the world. It was trying to succeed within the world of the film, and it did that with an elegance that is staggering in retrospect. It is a record that demands you pay attention not to the lyrics, but to the atmosphere. It asks you to observe the space between the notes, where the real character of the music lives. If What's Going On was a sermon, and Let's Get It On was a prayer, Trouble Man was a conversation in a dark room. It is intimate, yes, but in a way that feels like it's keeping its distance. It doesn't invite you in. It lets you observe it from across the table. It is the sound of a man who has mastered his tools and is, for the first time, not concerned with whether he is being liked. He is only concerned with whether the work is true. When the final tracks fade out, you are left with the sense that you have walked through an entire narrative without a single word being spoken, purely through the architecture of a sound that is as cool and dangerous as the character it was written to accompany. This record was the palate cleanser that made the intensity of his subsequent work possible. By stepping outside of his own shadow for a moment, by working within the boundaries of someone else's vision, Marvin found the renewal required to dive back into the raw, interior work of his own life. Trouble Man is not just a soundtrack. It is a vital bridge between his most political statement and his most personal confession. It is the secret masterpiece that holds the weight of his legacy together, hidden in plain sight, proving that even when Marvin Gaye wasn't trying to be the greatest artist in the world, he still managed to make something that was beyond anything his contemporaries could imagine. It remains a masterclass in mood, a triumph of instrumental storytelling, and a permanent, necessary reminder that his genius was never defined by the records that changed the world, but by the relentless, evolving, and unstoppable nature of his own musical curiosity. It was the sound of a man walking alone, finding beauty in the urban gloom, and leaving a trail of music behind him for anyone willing to listen.